What do you do when your faith system no longer fits? Because sometimes you outgrow it. Sometimes you graduate, you ascend. You leave the old, itchy, worn-out way and you begin to walk in the new. Sometimes you grow. Join the conversation with me, Tony Werfel, author, speaker, teaching pastor, as we help unwrap and rebuild a faith that no longer fits. We learn to walk into the new, messy journey called life. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Faith Undone, where we continue to deconstruct and reframe what it means to be human, to be moving and changing and growing, to be an evolving person. So today I want to move through a couple different ideas, especially one that kind of came up this weekend. But before I do, let me just say this one more time, shameless plug, Faith Undone, the book. Many of you have already contacted me and you've said, I really like what you've done so far for the intro. And these are people who have joined the Patreon family. You've clicked patreon.com/Tony Werfel and you're a part of the group. And I've sent you out the intro and you've read some of it. I've had some really good feedback on it. And so if you want to be a part of this group of people who are helping me basically write this book of how I lost faith and then rebuilt something that worked, if you want to be a part of that, Faith Undone, Losing Your Religion, Finding Your Soul, please go to my Patreon page, patreon.com/Tony Werfel, and donate. And I'll send you that first chapter this month, the end of this month. So hopefully we'll be able to do that together. Today, I want to talk about what it means to be a good receiver of gifts. And where this is coming from is I was with some friends in Oakland this weekend, and we were sitting down at this table together eating. And as we're eating, we're laughing, we're telling jokes, it's just a really good time. And at the end, what typically happens is the waitress or waiter will bring the bill. And typically everyone will fling out their cards and we'll all do the whole dance of, how do we divide this and this and this. Well, instead of doing the dance, my friend Lee, she pulls out her credit card, hands it to the waitress leaves, and we're all kind of like, wait, what just happened? Did you just pay the bill? And then something awkward happened because my pride started to take over. And I think I'm probably not alone in this because I think as I'm sharing this story, many of you are saying, oh yeah, I think I've been there. Because what took place is as she paid for it, I immediately responded with, well, I'll pay you back. I'll get you back. How dare you do that? I started to do that whole dance. And it got a little awkward. And I remember kind of feeling a bit like an ass. Because here my friend is trying to do a good thing for me, trying to do a positive thing, and I just can't allow it to happen without like throwing in my 2 cents or making it appear awkward. And so I had this plane ride home, and it's only like an hour-ish of a ride, but I sat there, and that moment kind of came back to me, and I started reconsidering that moment because lately what I've been doing is when something like that takes place, I'm learning to just stop and kind of sit with it and start asking questions of it. And so as I'm on the plane, I started asking some questions. For me, it was, why did that happen that way? Why did I respond in the way I did? And the more I thought about it, there were some interesting things, cycles, ideas that started kind of popping up in my mind. Why is it that I cannot receive gifts well? Why is it that I always have to make a big deal about it? And so I started thinking about this and I wrote some ideas down. I just wanted to share some with you. And then I want to share a story, a parable that kind of fits with the idea of being a good receiver of a gift. And so some of the ideas that kind of came to me, that the reasons why I kind of struggle with even just receiving a gift in the first place was I wrote down these 5 different ideas that basically I think are causing me receiver constipation? I don't know. But basically an inability to receive. And so one of the first things I thought of was many of us, we put up this defense. Basically, we want to defend ourselves against intimacy. Because I think what happens when someone gives a gift, it basically invites this very intimate moment where you basically acknowledge that person did a good thing. And what that means is sometimes we let our guards down in that moment. And I think for many of us, we've kind of built up a lot of these walls, and we've built up a lot of ways in which we don't have to be vulnerable. And so when someone gives a gift, many of us, we kind of hold back, we kind of push back against it because we don't want the intimacy. Many of us just want to do our own thing, be our own person, apart from a gift. And so I would say there is a very real beauty to accepting the gift because it actually invites a really beautiful moment of intimacy with people if we can allow ourselves to receive. Another thing that came up for me was I sometimes find myself needing to have control. And I don't know about you, if there are any people out there that like you are a control freak, you need to have control over every single situation that's going on. But when someone gives a gift, it basically, I mean, you really don't have much control over that. And so I think for some of my friends out there that are like the control freaks, the ones that absolutely have to have the control, I think this is extremely threatening for you and me. Because again, I lay down my guard, I become vulnerable. I almost kind of have to, I'm in your control now. And what I mean by that is basically I've given up the control to pay the bill. You've given me a compliment. You've done the good thing, and I can't control that. And it means I've become vulnerable. But I think there's a real beauty to being vulnerable. There's a real beauty to saying I'm letting my guard down. I don't have control over every situation. I don't have control over what is given to me, but I do have control over how I receive it. And I think that's a real beautiful, important part to remember. Another thing that kind of came to me was ever since I was younger, I remember my parents, and again, they did it. They had the best of intentions. But I remember I would do something good, just like you would when you were younger. And when you would do that good thing, when you would catch that catch or draw that drawing or get that grade, basically you were told, good job. You were given positive reinforcement. And so in order to gain the positive reinforcement, in order to gain the gift, you had to do certain things. And so I think for me and for many of us, when someone gives us something, in the back of many of our minds, we're thinking, well, what did I do to deserve that? And then, of course, for many of us, we realize I didn't do anything to receive that. And so we begin to feel guilty and a bit shameful because, man, what do I need to do now in order to be deserving of that thing? Is there some kind of string attached to this now? Did they give this thing to me now so that now I have to do this and this and this? And really, when you start going down that rabbit hole, you begin realizing I have absolutely no faith or trust in the people, the friends, the community, the family around me. When you begin to see people as, oh, they must have something attached to this gift, the whole relationship, the whole thing begins to fall apart. But when I can begin to just say, man, this was a nice gift you gave me. That was a nice compliment you just offered. When I can accept it, without worrying about the strings attached, I'm actually free to really enjoy the thing you gave me, to accept it. No one wants to hear the whole like, oh, not really. That's not really, oh, I did okay. Again, that's false humility. And that's the next thing I wanted to kind of bring up was many of us, we were told in religious systems that you have to be the kind of person that, I don't deserve that. Oh, it's better to give than to receive, that whole idea. We kind of bought into that, a lot of us. We bought into this idea you have to be humble. We're not deserving of the good things. I remember when I was pastoring, I would get up front every week in front of all of these people, like hundreds and hundreds of people. And I remember I would share these different messages. And the truth be told, I spent tons of time just putting the whole thing together. I would get there super early in the morning beforehand, and I would actually go over my notes, pour over them. I'd go through all the slides like 3 or 4 times. I just wanted it to be good. And so I'd put all this energy into it. And so afterwards, it was very important to this tribe that you go to the very back afterwards and you shake hands with everybody. You're shaking hands, kissing babies. You're the politician. And so I remember shaking hands, kissing babies. And I remember being told over and over again and throughout my childhood and even in adulthood, I remember people saying, especially these mentors, they would say, you need to always give the praise to God, which again sounds kind of okay on paper, but the reality is it's kind of weird because I'd say, oh, well, thank you, but praise God, it's the big guy upstairs. And I remember saying that and not really meaning that fully because I did put a lot of time and energy into it. Why couldn't I just say to those people, well, thank you? Like, I really did put a lot of time into that. Thank you for noticing. Why couldn't I say that? Because every time I would say the whole prepackaged, well, praise the Lord, he's up there, he's very happy with me. Whenever I would do that kind of thing, I remember the responses would always be kind of awkward. It would be like a typical, okay. They would walk away with that because they too kind of picked up on the false humility of it. And so I think instead of the false humility, the false pretense, maybe instead just getting to the place where we can say, you know what? Thank you. I really did work for it. Thank you. In the back of your mind, maybe say, you know what? Yeah, they see something good in me and I accept that. That is a far healthier way than always fighting against it, always bringing the false humility to it. And then the last one that came to me was one of the issues I have often is I just constantly in the back of my mind feel this pressure to reciprocate. I feel this pressure to basically constantly find ways to one-up people. And I think many of you know this, what I mean by this. You get the gift and now you feel obligated to give a better gift. And so before you know it, you get into this weird battle or competition with your friends. The people who try to do something good for you, now all of a sudden you're trying to outdo them and now they've bought into this competition and you're both trying to outdo each other. And it just gets weird. All because of the simple fact that you and I couldn't just accept the gift. And so when we buy into the idea that we have to reciprocate and we have to do better, we actually break down relationship rather than building and growing in connection. The thing deteriorates. And so all of this has been kind of interesting for me to kind of move through and come to some realizations of how to be a better receiver of gifts. One of the things that I've found when I read through some of the gospel stories of Jesus, a lot of the parables he shares oftentimes revolve around receiving a gift. And so there's a story in Matthew, and I know many of you're kind of like, another Bible story, but there's beauty here. And so just hang with me for a few minutes because in Matthew 25, Jesus shares this really interesting parable. And it's important to keep in mind that Jesus, the majority of his time, the majority of things written about him is actually all centered around the idea of what does the kingdom come reality look like? And again, kingdom come was how do we live this present life more abundantly? How do we live even when we're in the middle of depression, in the middle of being captives under Rome? How do we experience freedom? How do we experience life more abundantly? And so this is the dominant theme. It was never about how do I get to heaven. Heaven was the concept of here and now. It was never about, Jesus wasn't saying to a bunch of people, hey, I'm going to go die someday. That's good news. No, they were preaching the good news, it says, before Jesus died. That wasn't the good news. Jesus is going to die. He's going to raise again. That wasn't the good news. The good news was about the kingdom come reality. So that was kind of a side note. So here we go. So Jesus is asked about the kingdom come reality. How do we experience it? What does it look like? So Matthew 25, it says this. I'm just going to read some of it to you. Again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. So first off, here's a big issue with the story. If someone during that time period is reading this, alarms are going off because the owner of a large estate who has a bunch of servants, when this person leaves or gives an inheritance, they basically give it to their sons, right? Their children. But this landlord is a little different, which is interesting because this landlord says, no, I'm going to give my stuff. I'm going to give a ton of basically a bunch of bags of silver here or in some interpretations or translations, gold, right? I'm going to give a bunch of wealth to these lowly servants, not my children, but my servants, the lowly. And so it goes like this. He divides it up, and he gives, for one, he gives 5 bags of, gold, silver, whatever. He gives another one 2 bags, and then another one 1 bag. And what takes place then is the question, again, this is a story, it's a metaphor, it's not real, right? It's real because it's bigger than that. It's metaphor, and metaphor can go way deeper than literal. So the metaphor, the beautiful truth behind this thing is that it digs deep into the question of, what does life more abundantly look like? Well, when you're given the beautiful gift of life more abundantly, what do you do with it? And so then it follows the servants. And so it says the one servant with the 5, he goes and he basically invests the 5 and he gets 5 back. The next one with the 2, he does the very same thing. He gets 2 back. Now, the problem is there's a third guy. And the third guy who is given the 1, he digs a hole and just buries it. You kind of see where Jesus is going with this. When you're given the life more abundantly, when you're given this beautiful gift, what do you do with it? Do you sit on it? Do you bury it? Do you put it in death? Does it decay? Or do you live it out fully, and does it reproduce and become more and more abundant? What do you do with the beautiful gift you've been given? And so the landlord, of course, comes back, and he of course says to the first guy, "Good job, good servant." The other guy with the 2, who's become 4, "Great job." And then what takes place next is really fascinating, because to the third one, this is what takes place. The servant, after being questioned, he says, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant, gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here's your money back." Now, here's something really fascinating to think about. In this story, not once does the landlord ever appear this way. A harsh man? Like, I'm sorry, but a harsh man does not just give his servants that much money. Like that's a ton of money during that time period. No way. This man is not harsh. Nowhere does he seem to be like he's gathering crops, doesn't cultivate. It doesn't fit. But this third man, he has this opinion of others. That everyone else is out to get him, that he needs to protect himself from everyone else. Sound familiar? The idea here is that he's unable to see the beauty of the person who's offering the gift. And because of that, he's unable to truly receive the gift. And so this is what happens after this servant says this. The master says this, and I find this really interesting. He says, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops and didn't plant and gather crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you just deposit your money in the bank, right? That would have seemed like the more obvious thing to do. At least I could have gotten some interest on it, right? At least you could have given back a good gift. But no, it's nothing like that." So he orders this. He gives out an order, and he says, "Take the money," but then he says, "Throw the useless servant into outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." Now, here's the thing. Again, this is metaphor. This is not a reference towards some literal hell or anything like that. No, this is a metaphor, and it's a metaphor about a kingdom come present reality. It's about learning to receive the gift. And so when someone does not receive the gift, when you are at the party and someone pays for your meal and you get all bent out of shape and you're like, "No," and you try to be the one-upman, you start fighting over this and you get caught up in that vicious cycle. You become a slave to the thing. When you do that, you stop participating in the dinner. You stop participating in the party. You stop participating in the celebration that's all around you. And this is what happens to the third one. He basically has pushed himself out of the party. He's pushed himself away from the celebration because he could not receive the good gift. And I think for many of us, that's what happens. we can't receive the good gift, and we end up like putting ourselves in this weird outer place where there's just a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. We're constantly at odds with everyone because we just don't know how to receive. And oftentimes it's because we see ourselves as not worthy to receive. And so some of the things that I'm learning right now is I'm learning that when you get the gift, take it, appreciate it, sit with the thing, enjoy the thing. And only when you do that, do you have any room in your heart, any room in your life to begin sharing it with others. Now, a lot of religious systems, they talk about like good news. They'll say, we've got this really good news. And most of the time their good news is like, hey, Jesus was murdered on a cross by his father and he was buried. Now he's raised again. That wasn't actually the good news that the gospel was referring to. It was about the kingdom come reality, the gift that was given. But I've seen a lot of people, they'll talk about salvation, wholeness, healing. They'll talk about it, and then they'll want to go share it with others. But what I've often experienced is there are a lot of people in a lot of communities. They'll talk about healing and salvation. Or they'll talk about forgiveness. They'll talk about being an authentic expression, right? They'll talk about all these things. But when you really dig deep into the people and you begin to see how they are, how they live, what you'll sometimes find is that some of these people aren't actually even receiving the thing that they're attempting to share. And so what happens a lot of times is you get these people, these communities of people who are talking about good news, about healing, about restoration, and they haven't even experienced it for themselves. And so I would say this. If you got anything from the podcast, here's what I got from this weekend, is I need to learn to be a better receiver of gifts. I need to understand that I am worthy of these gifts. I'm a miraculous, living, breathing being, and it is just fantastic I'm alive. And any gift that's given to me, I can learn to appreciate it, to not fight against it, but to just accept it and welcome it in. And I can appreciate the person giving the gift. I don't have to keep wondering, is this person giving it in order to get this or this or this? I don't have to go there. And probably there are like a couple people in your life that maybe avoid them. They're just giving you these things to make you do certain things. Yeah, so you avoid those people. But the 95% of others, they're giving that thing to you. They're acknowledging you. They're giving you the compliment. They're paying for your meal because they too see the beauty in you. And they want to share it with you. And so when you have that opportunity, accept it, take it in, and then learn to share it with others. Receive the gift, live with the gift, enjoy the gift, and then share it with others. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this podcast. And as always, please go to Patreon. Please go to patreon.com/Tony Werfel. Please be a donor. And we'll see you next week. It's going to be a really neat series we're going to begin next week. So blessings, everyone, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.